what we do is a lot of research in SAP security area since 2007 probably, and we also do the security products for the SAP. And so not many people after the lunch, as usual. Okay, so how many of you know what is SAP and what is SAP security? Wow, cool things. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, actually I'm mostly present on the more technical conferences, so my talks are mostly very technical, so, but this one will be like a more overview, but you will see one interesting demo. I hope it will be interesting for you. So we will start with a brief introduction about the SAP security, and what I'm actually presenting is the results of our research during all this year. So we were analyzing the different metrics of SAP security. We scanned whole internet, and we were trying to find the SAP systems, to analyze how many systems are with different countries, what kind of issues they have, and lots of more details. So it will be the presentation of this research, and the full research will be published, I think, in the end of this month. It will be a big white paper. So, and we actually have the similar white paper last year. So this year will be the like changes from last year and this year. So the SAP is, as you probably know, the biggest vendor of business critical applications. So that's why we're focusing on it. And why you should think about SAP security? It's pretty simple, actually. All your critical data is stored and processed in the ERP system, or in other business applications. So what will happen if, for example, there are also other systems that should be secured, the mobile devices and stuff like that. But what will happen if, like, you will not use the mobile devices? It will be probably okay because 5 years ago you don't use the mobile devices. But what will happen if your SAP system will be broken or will be attacked by somebody, or you just can't do your business, so the company will stop, because you need to do all the HR and financial stuff manually without the SAP. So it's kind of the end of the business. So there are 3 areas why this is critical. The first one is espionage, because if somebody can get access to the SAP system, he can steal the financial data, the HR data, the corporate secrets, and etc. He can also do the sabotage by making denial of service attacks on the SAP. And what is more critical, that the SAP systems are usually connected to technology systems, technology networks, and SCADA systems. So by getting access to the SAP, you can easily get access to the SCADA system. And of course, it's an internal fraud. So by having access to the SAP system, you can modify the financial data. You can make a transactions to your account. You can actually steal money. So this is very critical. So what I'm going to talk is first of all about the SAP vulnerabilities. I hope you can see that this is a number of the security SAP security notes that were published every year. This year is like an approximate, because it's not already finished. And you see that more than 2,600 vulnerabilities in total were found in the SAP systems. And it's quite a lot, especially if you understand that sometimes it's the only one issue is not to get access to all your business critical data. And most of those issues are like correction with high priority, so it's critical issues. And the thing is, the number of low priorities is getting low because there were lots of low priority vulnerabilities in 2009, but now they're low. But the number of the high priority issues is getting high. So you see that the overall number of vulnerabilities is going a little bit low, but they started to be more and more dangerous. What kind of issues there are in the SAP? Actually, you can see lots of the things you are familiar with. It's cross-site scripting, some SQL injections, direct traversals, and stuff like that. But once is the SAP relevant issues missing authorization checks. So every time you run the transaction in the SAP system, it checks the authorization if you have access or not. So basically, there are lots of the transactions which miss the authorization checks. The other area is like SAP is working with external researchers who are actually finding vulnerabilities in SAP and sending to the SAP security response team. Some of the guys are sitting here of the security response, SAP security response team. So thanks a lot for those guys. And actually, you will see that the number of the percent of the issues which were found by the external researchers comparing to the issues that were found by the SAP. So it's growing. So the interest in this area is growing, and lots of more new companies are interested in finding issues in SAP products. And what's also I found to be interesting is that we're actually finding about 50 or from 50 to 100 different issues to the SAP security response team every year. And you see the number of the already patched issues. So we send some kind of vulnerability, and they respond us like this vulnerability were already closed. So every year, the number of already closed vulnerabilities is getting bigger and bigger. So it means that the security of the SAP system is getting better. Or we don't know how to find the new issues. The other thing is why SAP security is essential, because the number of the different researchers started to speak on the different conferences, on the technical conferences, about the ways of attacking the SAP system using different vulnerabilities. And the number of talks is really growing, and all those talks are unique talks about the unique issues on the SAP system. There are lots of different areas. First of all is talks about the common things like SAP backdoors, SAP rootkits, SAP forensics. So you can take all things that are relevant for other systems and try it on the SAP. There were lots of talks probably about every service which is used by the SAP. The gateway, router, the GUI, the SAP portal, all those services were broken, and vulnerabilities were presented in the different conferences. As well as there are lots of the proprietary protocols which are used by the SAP, and all of them were analyzed, and in all of them were found some different issues. Also the issues in different languages that used by the SAP. So the most common language that used in the SAP is ABAP language, it's internal language to make the customizations for the SAP system. And it is also, they were found that there are ABAP SQL injections and ABAP buffer overflows and stuff like that. So almost every part of the SAP system were somehow broken. And we analyzed all the most interesting vulnerabilities that were found during the last year. Here is the top 5 of the issues that were found by us and other researchers. And I will tell you a little bit more about every of them. So the first one, and how do we make this top 5 list? Basically, of course it's the criticality of the issue, but the most critical is if this issue can be exploited remotely, and if this issue is something like a new type of attack. So the first place is the server-side request forgery type of vulnerability, which was found in web servers. And it's very critical in terms of espionage and sabotage. It can be exploited anonymously through the internet. You don't need to have any access to the system. And it has a very high future impact because it's a new type of attack. And I will show you the small demonstration, like what is a server-side request forgery. By the way, how many of you know what is the acronym of server-side request forgery? Wow, cool. Some people. Okay. So it will be a little bit technical, but I hope you will understand the concept. So let's say we have two different systems. One system is exposed to the internet, like web portal or something. Another system, like ERP system, which is available only inside the company. You can't send a request to the ERP system when you're in the internet. But what you can do is pass the request through the portal if it has the server-side request forgery issue. I'll show you how it works. So first of all, so we do an ERPScan of open ports on two systems. The one system have IP address 1063 and another have IP address 1065. So the 1065 is the ERP system. We did a scan and we see only 3 open ports. And there is no SAP open ports. So we can't connect to the open ports of the SAP system, internal system. The second scan is IP address 63. Yeah, so to prove it, we're just trying to connect to the SAP port 8000 of the 65 IP address. And we can't do this because the port is closed for us. But the system, which is but the portal system, which is exposed to the internet with the IP address 63, it can connect to the ERP system. So we're trying to connect and receive some kind of response. So what we do, so what we found is a vulnerability on the external portal. Actually, it's not only vulnerability in external portal, it's a vulnerability on one of the services, which is a web service with the name of Dilbert message. So it was a test service to show how the XML exchange is working. And so what we do is we inject, so this service accepts XML requests. What we do is inject the packet to the internal system within the XML, with an XML packet. And we do it through the special vulnerability which calls XXE, and inside of the XML packet, we're actually sending the packet to the internal system, and this packet is URL encoded. I know it's not easy to describe all this type of attack and understand it, because it took us the whole presentation on previous Black Hat to describe all this attack. But actually, the idea is you inject packet in packet, and through the vulnerability you can send a request to the internal system, even if it's under the firewall. And so what we're going to do is we pack the remote exploit, which is running calculator on the internal system, and by sending this XML request, you see the list of the processes, and we send this request, and you see the calculator is running. So that's how we can bypass the firewall restrictions and stuff like that. So this is a very interesting type of attack, and it's not only the SAP is vulnerable to this attack. SAP have only the example how to reproduce this attack through the vulnerable interface. The next issue is command injection in service, which is called SAP host control. It's also very critical, so you can inject the commands of operation system, and they will be executed on the SAP side. And the third one is vulnerability in the Java stack, where you can anonymously read and write any file. And the fourth is vulnerability in the message server, which is a buffer overflow, simple buffer overflow vulnerability. It's very critical, but it's not easy to exploit it. First of all, because you need to write the exploit, and secondly, the SAP used a lot of different operation systems and versions and etc. So to make a relevant exploit for all those systems, you need to spend a lot of time. And if you do a penetration test, you need to be sure that your exploit is really working on the system, because otherwise, if you do the penetration test and you break the SAP system, you will have lots of problems, more problems than you already have. And the fifth one is also the buffer overflow vulnerability in SAP DR protocol. And what is interesting about most of those vulnerabilities, they can be exploited anonymously through the internet, because sometimes companies expose the services to the internet. You can ask why, and I actually don't know, because sometimes it's just because administrators want to have remote access to the administration services from home or from company. Sometimes people just don't realize that it's critical. And so to prove it, like that this is a real threat, we started our research and we started our project to scan all the SAP ports through the internet. So we ran some clusters on the Amazon and just run the Nmap scan on SAP ports on all the internet. And what I can say is, like, even now lots of people think that the SAP system is only internal system, but it's not, because it should be open to the internet for some reasons, for the partners, for the external researcher, for the external companies, and even for the SAP. And so first of all, companies should have the external systems like SRMs, CRMs for remote connection. The second is they need to connect the different offices by Exchange infrastructure systems. And they need to be connected to the SAP system to get the updates. So they should implement the SAP router on the internet. And of course, the users that connect to the SAP, they can go to the internet, so actually you can attack the users, and through the users you can attack the SAP system. And as I said before, administrators open remote management interfaces. What about the SAP portals and external system? We did a simple Google scan and we found almost 700 different SAP web systems like SAP portals on the internet. And the number of those systems is growing, so actually the SAP is expanding their systems. If you look at the countries, so sure you will see that the United States, Germany, India is one of the biggest clients of SAP. And the next step was to analyze other resources, and we did analyze of Shodan search engine, which can be used to find different web services. And so you can see that how many different web services were found based on the SAP Java or SAP ABAP. And the number of SAP Java systems is growing. And what can I say about the Shodan scan by the country? So some of the countries, mostly in the Asia-Pacific region and Latin America, have more and more SAP systems. So this scan is not only analyze the exposed services, it also can show you the where the SAP market is growing. So now we see that because in Europe, in the United States, in Germany, almost every company has SAP, but in Asia Pacific, in Latin America, they just started to do this, and they have lots of systems exposed to the internet. And another scan was done through analyzing the internet census. It actually was not a legal project, so the guys run the botnet which scan all the internet, but the other ports, not the SAP ports, the other ports. And you can download all the information about what kind of ports are open in the internet. So when we analyzed only SAP systems to find out how many SSL and not SSL systems there are. So what we found by analyzing the platform of the SAP NetWeaver is that the most popular version which is presented on the internet is 7.2, which was released in November 2005, which is really old and have a lot of issues. But comparing to the previous year, the number of this version was 45%, and this year is 35%. So actually, the number of the new systems, SAP systems on the internet is growing. So security is getting better. And so what NetWeaver SAP system on the internet based on ABAP engine? The most popular issue is information disclosed about the system, version, etc., which was found by this URL. So the last year, before we actually present our research, there were 59% of the systems have this kind of vulnerability. This year, only 6% of systems have this vulnerability. So I think that our research was a good point for companies to close those issues. But which is more critical is there is a web service for executing remote requests to the SAP system using SOAP interface. And you actually can, if you have username on the system, or if you try to use the default usernames and passwords, and there are lots of default usernames and passwords in SAP, you can do a lot of crazy things like execute operation system command and create SAP users remotely. So last year, 40% of systems have this service exposed to the internet, this year it's only 6%, which is great. And for the Java engine, it's another type of application server which is used by SAP. Approximately the same results. And Java server also have the information disclosed vulnerabilities, and the number of last year, number of this year is much better. And in Java engine there is a critical service which is called CTC, and this service can be exploited anonymously by simply sending two requests, two HTTP requests, and you can create user in the SAP system remotely. And this vulnerability was presented by us in the Black Hat conference like almost 2 years ago, and there are still lots of services exposed to the internet with this issue. So okay, how we can pass through the internet to the internal network? And the first one is the SAP router, which is actually almost every company needs to have SAP router for having updates from the SAP company. It usually lives in this port. And we found that by the scanning internet we found about 5,000 different SAP routers. And there are different issues on the SAP router. The first one is, like every other router, it has an access control list. And this access control list can have things like accept all connections from every IP to every IP. So that's how we can bypass the system. And so 15% of the routers are vulnerable to this attack. And the second is information disclosed about the connections. So that's how you can analyze what kind of systems are internally. But the most, I think one of the most critical issues is authentication by class, which was found in 5% of the exposed routers, which is really lots. And what we also find is the heap corruption vulnerability in SAP router. It was closed like 1 month ago, but we can't disclose the details now. And as for the other port scans, I skip something. So this is the percent of companies which have different SAP services exposed to the internet. And they really don't need to do this because all those services are for the remote administration or for the remote connections. So it's management services. And they have issues. And if you compare the results of the Singapore with the overall world, so in Singapore there are much more exposed services. Maybe it's because the SAP system is new for this area and not many people know that it must be secure. So for every service, I need to pass through it quickly, but for every service, there are issues that can be exploited through the internet. And so the host control can be used for the remote command injections. And the management console can be used to remote reading log files. And message server also have a memory corruption vulnerability, and exploit for this vulnerability is available on the internet. So and almost every 60th company is vulnerable, but last year there were lots more. And what is for the SAP dispatcher service? Actually, the service which is used by the SAP GUI, the client application, to connect to the SAP system. I don't know why it can be exposed to the internet. We saw lots of the companies, probably every 20th company exposed to the internet. So, okay, you saw lots of potential vulnerabilities that can be exploited, but what about the real threats? Maybe who actually tried to exploit it? So I'll pass through the exploit market interest and some type of attacks. So first of all, there is an interest on vulnerabilities of the SAP systems from the white hat companies like a ZDI who buy the exploits. So only last year the 5 critical SAP vulnerabilities were found. There are companies who trade exploits between white hats and not only white hats. I was talking with them and they're actually interested in buying. So they have a clients for selling and buying exploits for the SAP system. As for the black hat market, I don't know. So, but maybe they are also interested in it. So for example, it was published like in 2007. So the guy published it for like, I sell the remote zero-day vulnerabilities in SAP. So like, and another guy said, okay, can I see the price list? And another one is last year there were news about the attack on the Greece finance ministry by the Anonymous using the vulnerability, zero-day vulnerability in SAP system. Well, this attack is not officially confirmed by the SAP or other authorities, so I think this is more than real, because you saw lots of vulnerabilities exist, and why not? As for the insider attacks, so examples what we met while consulting our clients, and what they met, they actually met a lot of their fraud, like salary modification, like like people inside the company change their salary, and there were found some material management fraud, and also mistaken transactions, which can be quite dangerous. So if somebody buys 10 pieces of something, or 100 pieces of something instead of 10 pieces, and if it's water, it's nothing. But if it's like cars or excavators or something like that, it's a big difference. What about the backdoors in a source code? They really exist. It's not sometimes easy to find it, but in one of our engagements, we really find like with the comment like allow access to processing only for developers. And in this code, you see the check of the if username who execute this transaction is equal to some username. So we'll do some kind of it concatenates the data with the file. So it stores the data with the file. So it's like an probably a backdoor which was left by the developer. And so what was happened already in other world, like what types of attacks, interesting attacks like spionage, fraud, and sabotage. So first one is the AutoCAD virus, which was probably made by China to spy on the AutoCAD documents. It's an internet trading virus, which used the modification of Trojan to make the fraud transactions in internet trading, and sabotage of hacking news resources. So it's not about the SAP, but you can imagine that if you try to make the same concept, but for the SAP system, like the virus, spionage for the SAP system, or changing something on the SAP system, on one particular system, or the systems around all SAP systems in one particular country. I don't want to describe the details of what can be done, but you can imagine if you have access to, if you can make a virus which can have access to all SAP systems of a particular country, you can do everything just to stop the whole economy and collapse, stuff like that. But I have a good news. So the SAP is really working on application security and some of the guys are sitting here from the SAP security response team, and they do a lot of job on internal security, SDLC processes. They do security sites for internal researchers, and we discuss the details about the different vulnerabilities on those sites. They do internal trainings, and teach them how to make the software better. And they invest lots of money in application security, like in automatic and dynamic source code analysis and services and stuff like that. So what I can say about the future trends, it's like, of course the old issues are being patched, but SAP is doing lots of new stuff like HANA, mobile and cloud things, so they also can be vulnerable. And the number of the companies which are analyzing the SAP security is growing. And the SAP forensics, so after the possible attack on the Greece Finance Ministry, the SAP forensics probably will be the new area for research for next year. And even this year we were presenting some results on the SAP forensics. So for example, so based on the assessment on about 250 different systems, we analyzed how many companies actually have security, have logging on SAP systems, and not many companies have logging enabled on SAP systems. So probably they are already attacked, but they can't prove it, and they can't prove that they are not breached by somebody because they simply don't enable the log files, the logs. And this is the percent of companies which implement different types of logs. You see that this one is logging of HTTP requests, and you know why this percent is so big? Because it's enabled by default. So that's why. And the other logs are not enabled by default, so that's why the number is so small. But how can you prove that you don't have attacks if you don't enable logs? You can't prove it. What else can I say? There are lots of, not very much, but it's the number of the software and products for analyzing SAP security is also growing. And I've listed the numbers. So there are 4 areas of the software for the SAP securities. First one is the monitoring and vulnerability assessment. Second is segregation duties and internal access control. CM and ABAP source code security. And so this number is probably big because I've collected not only the software which is focused only on SAP, but also some of the common security scanners which have something for the SAP, so at least 10 checks. So, but the special SAP security products have some of checks. But it's just an approximate numbers, and in the interceptions you can see that how many systems have capabilities of both or 2 or 3 or 4 of listed things. So it's like a conclusion, the interest of SAP security is really growing, and not only in the white hats area, but we have a good news. So the SAP security in default configuration is getting much more, is much better now. You saw that the SAP systems can become a target for not only for the direct attacks, like one of the competitors want to attack another competitor, but it also can be used for the mass exploitation, because if you have lots of the remote services exploited, you can do some kind of worms and for attacking all the SAP landscape. And the SAP invests lots of money and resources for their guidelines for security, but unfortunately now we see that the administrators and the people who actually implement SAP systems don't pay lots of attention on this area. So in most cases, SAP now is much secure on the default configuration. So it provides a lot of things to be secure, but you need to know a lot of the customization to make it secure. So, and I hope this talk and this report, which will be published, the whole report which will be published later, will do this job in making the SAP implementations more secure. So, and the final conclusion is, issues are everywhere, and it's okay, but the risks and the price for mitigating are different if you compare the critical systems like SAP with the other systems. Yeah, I'd like to thank the SAP Security Response team for everything and for good work with us. And if you are interested in SAP security and you can attend our other presentations on the Black Hat and Lifecycle Summit and other areas. So thanks a lot, and I hope you enjoyed this presentation. It was quite, maybe it's quite fast, but you have a chance to download the full release of SAP security figures in a couple of weeks or in the end of the month. So thank you for listening. And if you have any questions, I'm ready to answer them. Yeah?
Thanks for the presentation. Sorry, I joined 15 minutes late. So, my question is, say for example, if I have a source code, a web source code. So, what tool do you suggest I use for doing automated security assessment? Source code review.
There are three tools, three commercial tools to do this. I don't want to say the names. We also have one. And what you also can do is to try to do it manually by simply making the graph analysis. But it's not good because you need to analyze the data flow. Because if you do only the graph analysis, you can find like a call of the critical function or possible SQL injection. But you will have lots of noise, false positives. And that's why you need to analyze the data flow.
Yeah, I understand that manually it can be done, but the port size is very huge and the amount of time I have is very less. So if not commercial, any open source tools which are there which can help us?
No, so the simplest way is to use some SAP internal transactions that can find the critical areas of code, but they don't do a data flow.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks.
Yep. Do all these things also affect SAP 1?
I think not all, because we don't have we don't analyze the SAP 1 because it's like we mostly focused on the enterprise business. So as far as I know, it's the same issues can be.
I'm no SAP practitioner, but recently I took a look at the SAP operating model, support model. And what I see from a holistic view is that SAP routers appears to be like a huge backbone to the organization from an external entity. Now, there are many issues from regulated environment that I work in. So do you foresee that SAP will move away from such an operating model rather than having an SAP router that needs to sit in my environment that has a direct connectivity to a system that has sit in the innermost zone of my organization? Do you think SAP will one day
They have the possibility to do to configure SAP router through the VPN. So your SAP port will not be exposed to the internet. So it will be the VPN connection between you and the SAP. Is the correct answer to your question? Or
well, rather in this case, we always entrench and lock down our SAP to have the other people be able to come in directly and look at our systems. So we end up having to put up additional controls, just to ensure when they can come in, when they can't come in.
Okay. So, but they connect to your system by using early watch on the 66 client, and what you can do is to run the monitoring of this 66 client in audit and just analyze what they are doing.
Obviously, because additional controls to make sure that we're doing the right things.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think we are out of time, I'm sorry, but I'm sure Alexander will be available